I watched The Backrooms last night. Now, I think the main allure to The Backrooms, just as a movie, is that it was made by a 20-year-old, Kane Parsons. And I think a lot of people think of it like this movie is so good for a 20-year-old to make. You know, this is his debut movie, and it's quite impressive for someone with very little experience working with a cast and a crew. You know, he was mostly doing things on his own. And I think when you take away from that fact, it kind of loses a lot of its charm, but it's still very good, you know? If you think of it like a 20-year-old made this, that is insane. And then you think of it like a regular movie, you're like, it's fine. But it's more of a stepping stone to like this is the future of young filmmakers in the film industry. It's a very inspiring thing to see, you know what I mean? Now, I'm not incredibly well versed on the whole Backrooms lore just in general, but I think just as a baseline film, this sets the mythology pretty well. Both in dialogue and visually, they explain a lot of, very main tenements of what the Backrooms are. Most important thing that they establish is that the Backrooms remembers things over and over again until it deforms itself. I kept thinking of it like when you record a video to a VHS, and then you copy that VHS to another one, and then to another one, and then to another one, until you can't see anything anymore. Both they mention that in through dialogue. They say uh, there's several times where they say it's like going in there is like telling someone to draw a dog that you just described to them from memory or whatever. So it's like not going to be perfect, but it's like just kind of there. You know what I mean? And then they do it visually with some montages where you go down certain levels over and over again through someone's memory, and it just keeps changing every single time until it finally forms into the back rooms. But then there's like little glitches everywhere. I think for a general audience, people can understand what the backrooms are because how they're explaining it here. Now, some parts of the story feel clunky to me. I think with the introduction of the company or whatever, it's a bit too much, I suppose. I think it would have been a lot better without the company. I think it would be a lot better if they didn't have the company within the story and it was more of like them trying to escape from the backrooms themselves and just finding like weird remnants, you know? Making it so that it's like two people have come across the backrooms, but there's a company that already knows about it. It kind of takes away a bit of the mystery from it that it's like known to other people, and I think that would have been a better thing to introduce into like a sequel, honestly. My other main issue with it is that it's a lot of like a style over substance sort of thing. It's a little confusing, you know, what you're supposed to take from it. I think they try to do a story about trauma, especially with Mary, so we get a lot of background on Mary. It doesn't seem to translate very well into what her motivations are to go into the back rooms. So we get a lot of information on Mary, but we don't get a lot of information on Clark. And, you'll see Clark is the main villain, and I think if we saw more of his background, he kept saying, we're just wired this way, or I'm just wired this way. It's always been like that since I was a kid. If we saw him as a kid being that way, it would make a lot more sense how this, like, replication of people is like memories and ego being fueled into like an endless space, like forever. And it makes it a lot more scary. But instead, we got a lot of information on Mary and her trauma, and it doesn't seem to make much sense with the main story in general. At the beginning, we think that Clark is the main character, and then it becomes more about Mary near the end. But her story that they kind of laid out over and over again does not really seem to make much sense, like why it's there. Maybe they brought it up because it was more of like a motivation for her to be curious. She never was allowed to go outside. So now she has this forever place to explore, that kind of thing. I don't really understand why her mother shows up so much. It would have been a little corny, but it would have been a lot better if it was her mother who was the monster near the end or something. So it's like she finally defeats her own trauma or something like that. but instead it's about Clark. And again, we don't really see Clark's ego outside of the Backrooms and how it manifests into this. So Mary's story just seems kind of useless. I was talking to somebody recently, and they said that maybe there could be a prequel about Mary's mother, and she maybe saw the Backrooms, uh, and that's what made her go insane or something like that, just as Clark had gone insane. But the thing to remember is that Kane Parsons didn't write it. I think he just had a very good understanding of his creative direction, how he wanted to lay the mythology out, and then, had a very basic story, and then someone wrote the full screenplay. So I'm not blaming him on any part in that. That the story was a little bit. It could have been better. I think Parsons' directing was very good. I really enjoyed, his use of wide-angle lenses. I think a lot of people use wide-angle lenses now for horror films. But I think it was a good choice because it makes it feel very open, just kind of infinite, but also very claustrophobic because there are these tight spaces everywhere. I really do like the VHS effect that he does, kind of a found footage thing. He's done this in the past, it's what he's always done. The cold open establishes what the tone of the film is. It feels just right. Overall, it's a pretty good scary movie flick. I don't think it could be any more than. I mean, I could see it being a series. I could see it being a big series, but I think, for the regular moviegoer, seeing a movie that's kind of experimental, while also being a pretty classic horror movie, I think it does it pretty well. Anyway, that's it. It was a good movie.